Welcome to Edinburgh and to this edition of Community Radio at the Centre for Creative-Relational Inquiry. Our guests today are Alice Mendes and Jackie Mackay. Sorry, Janice Mackay. Did I get Jackie from? Alice is joining us from Australia, and I've described her as an educator. Alice has just told me she's never considered herself an educator before. And she's here to talk about her PhD on alternative education, which she has turned into a manuscript for a lay audience. And Janice is a storyteller and a writer, and she's now at Edinburgh doing her PhD, which fuses mythology and life writing. But before we begin, I thought we could start by settling ourselves in, and I'm going to ask Mark Price, who's in the room, to do something for us, which is a little section that we've been beginning with called A Poem or Something. So Mark, I'm hoping you have a poem or something to share.
I do, thank you, and hello everyone. When you mentioned this, Melissa, it's kind of going, where do I go? And anyway, this poem literally came to me. I found it completely by accident. And it's by someone called Frank O'Hara, who I'm sure some of you have heard of and have met before, and it's called Animals. Have you forgotten what we were like then, when we were still first rate, and the day came fat with an apple in its mouth? It's no use worrying about time, but we did have a few tricks up our sleeves and turn some sharp corners. The whole pasture looked like our meal. We didn't need speedometers. We could manage cocktails out of ice and water. I wouldn't want to be faster or greener than now if you were with me. Oh, you were the best days of all my days. That's it.
Wow, thank you. That was great. And that's calmed me down and given some nice pace. So I feel ready to introduce Alice and her work. And Alice, tell us what you've been up to in this last year of lockdown, writing your new manuscript out of your old manuscript.
Well, I'll first just say hello to everyone. I'm speaking to you today from Gubbi Gubbi country, north of Brisbane, and I'd like to acknowledge and pay respect to the elders past, present and emerging. I just want to say that before we start. So I'm now from the UK, I'm from the Lake District, but I'm now living in Australia, and it's very important, I feel, as a settler, colonial academic, to be writing and speaking from such a different space. So yes, my outlook has changed from writing a PhD on the move for the University of Hull in the UK, and to now turning that PhD into a manuscript for Tatiana, who's here. It's for her book series for the arts, creativities and learning environments in global perspectives. So it fits very nicely because my PhD research was searching for the ideal school around the world. And I was able to visit over 180 different schools who are educating differently in some aspects to traditional education in 23 countries. I wrote the first thesis in multiplicity of Alice We, so I used rhizomatic theory and different voices of Alice exploring these different schools. And then I wanted to bring this to a wider audience to see who would be wanted to be a school tourist. And that was my thesis, really, was performing school tourism. Who wanted to join me in visiting schools to start imagining educational change? Now, you said I had never seen myself as an educator. I write about education. It's funny when you do your own research and you don't see another way of looking back at your own work. So I was very excited to be seen as an educator.
Alice, would you like me to play your little video that introduces your work and which you mention at the beginning of your new manuscript, just to introduce people here to what you were doing?
Definitely, that would be great.
Okay,
Thank you.
Okay, I'm just I'm going to share my screen if I can. Am I sharing my screen? No. Share. And then play this. If I can.
I could do the audio over the top.
Oh yeah, go for it, Alice.
Because we can't hear it, can we?
Oh, sorry, you're not hearing. I'm sorry, Alice. I thought you were all hearing that. Just me. Okay. I'll tell you what. I can do the audio.
Melissa, I tried this. If you try to make the screen big, you will hear the sound and we will lose it. So perhaps
okay.
I tried that.
I'll try this portion of screen instead. Can you hear it now? Can you hear that? I hear something completely different. I hear somebody's door.
Yeah.
I don't think that's coming from me. Is it? Okay. Okay, Alice, I'm not really able to do this, am I? Ooh. Do you want to talk us through it, Alice?
Yeah, that would work.
Okay. I can show the image, or I can.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, we'll do that because you must know it inside out. Okay.
And I can actually do so. I made a couple of films after finishing my PhD because I wanted to have my own way of reflecting on my journeys and looking at the assemblage and the objects and the thing thought, the Harris and Holman Jones from their new book, the idea of all these objects which had been part of my rhizomatic journey, searching for the ideal school around the world. And I did a couple of workshops in Cumbria in 2018, working with different people. And this film was made from that work. I wove a stairwell after seeing a woven stairwell in Edinburgh earlier that year with ribbons that were connected to the stories. So the audio from this is what I told everybody as a meditation before we moved. Imagine a cup of instant coffee, its bitter taste wrapped around your mouth. Add now the taste of cheap milk and the slightly curdled flavour of your coffee gone cold, and you are beginning to enter into my materiality of my life, my quest, my journeys. For I'd been a teacher in a local mainstream state-funded school, rushed off my feet with expectations, pressure, assessments, marking, curriculum, and a life similar to prison, run by bells, hierarchy and strict rules, and endless cold instant coffee to wash it down. Ever since I trained to be a teacher in 2004, I was unhappy, fed up with the system. I struggled with the curriculum, the rules, the uniforms, hierarchies, homework and assessment. I managed to teach for 2 years before I had a retirement party in 2007. I then began my search for something else. I first found Steiner Waldorf and forest schools and continued to work in outdoor education, now focusing more on international expeditions and special needs groups. However, I was unsatisfied, so I retrained in early years and completed an MA in education, exploring alternatives to behaviourism. I was still unsatisfied, but I had hope. I was sure out there somewhere would be the new pedagogy of the 21st century, So I began visiting schools and places of learning that educated differently. This journey took me around the world to over 180 schools in 23 countries. I was a school tourist. I visited Montessori, Steiner, Democratic, Reggio Emilia, Krishnamurti, forest schools, progressive, home education, project-based learning, and many, many more, but I was never fully happy. So, I've got a little bit more. One day I was in Bali on a teacher's course at the Green School, and one of my colleagues said to me, "Alice, why are you so negative? Nothing is good enough for you." And it was an epiphany. I realized that it was true, as the ideal school was an oxymoron, and so I refocused and began to see the gems in each place. I called these gems that exist within the neoliberal system the education, and one of the ways I saw myself was as an edge dweller. This journey was very complex, and using Deleuzian theory, I saw my life as an itinerant vagabond nomad living in a van, and my journeys performing school tourism as a rhizome. I was ever moving between the centre and the periphery, sometimes flowering into a nodal point that would then die and compost into the rhizome to nourish another journey. I also realised that although I was using autoethnography, it was not about the I, so I wrote the thesis in different voices of the Alice we. Towards the end, I realised it was a much bigger picture, that of the earth we, that needs to be explored. It is a consciousness shift, not some new pedagogy or approach. So in this film, I'm darting between these different workshops, and it's a shame you can't hear it because there's a section, I don't know if we got to that, where people are running around outside shouting these words, which I'd given them as an exercise from this. And most of the people in that group are also from the north of England, and there's some really good, strong northern accents saying, "Fed up with the system, fed up with the system, die, compost and nourish." And there were some really inspiring ways that people played with my language. But actually, once I've been turning this into a book, it's been really interesting to actually see how much one progresses with your research 3 years on, to go back. It's almost been a treat to go back and look at my work again and think, what have I read since then? What is now relevant? And get really excited. I'm also very aware now about who I cite. And I feel that I relied quite heavily on a lot of male voices, a lot of white male voices. And I tried in my work to begin to actually include a more diverse range of voices and to really be conscious and more critical about who I was including. I know that when I'm writing for a different reader, people maybe aren't so aware of that, but I do know that if you cite people, then other people hear those voices. So I feel that my role as a feminist academic is changing and developing as I grow.
Mm-hmm. So who do you see as the audience for the new book? Who are you writing it for?
It's tricky because when I'm at the end of my work, I realized that school as we know it isn't the answer, in my opinion, for the future. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, I was using Maggie McClure's idea of data glow and looking for gems. So actually sharing stories, not listing possible gems to make a new ideal school, because I don't believe that's possible, but sharing stories from places that have begun to educate differently. So using innovative practices within their work. Mm. So then I'm hoping that some parents will be interested, some students might be interested, pre-service teachers. And I have been working with Professor Michael Carman, who wrote the foreword for my book. And we've worked with students visiting schools. So we were school tourists with pre-service teachers, because my thinking behind this is, for anyone who becomes a teacher or a parent or for children, if you haven't seen anything differently, how can you imagine differently? Mm. So it's to get people to think differently, so then maybe the collective consciousness will shift. Even somebody in the local school can do something differently if they are thinking differently into that space, and often that's through experiencing new places. So I'm hoping that more people will be able to be inspired to be school tourists.
To be school tourists or
so
to do things differently.
Performing school tourism is to encourage people to visit more places. So I wrote the book as the first few chapters are quite theoretical, but stepping stones. And then there's 6 or 7 chapters of just stories about different types of schools. A really deep 2 chapters on Steiner Waldorf's education, because that's my background. And then progressive education, democratic, because I was really interested in looking at much more on freedom, and then moving beyond that to places that are maybe mainstream schools, but they've got an innovative teacher or innovative approach within that. And then I go into the theory, because friends are always saying to me, well, where should I send my child to school? And it's very hard to turn around and say, well, I don't think school's good enough at the moment. They want more than that.
And I wonder what elements you think might work better when you talk about making a change in education. Are there elements that you think are core to a different approach?
I think it's beyond that. I honestly think it's beyond what we have at the moment. It's a big shift in thinking. And my hope is, I've been reading quite a lot of Donna Haraway recently and looking at sort of composting and the oddkin and moving all these ideas in a further way. Not because initially I ended my PhD saying we need a new story. And I don't think that's enough. We actually need to begin into this unthought space. We need to be practicing and thinking possibilities and looking at these different relationships between people and the non-human and the more than human. So it becomes much more complex, and that's not necessarily what everybody wants to hear. So my advice is, people don't just send their child to the school that's 500 meters away if there's a choice of other schools. I want you to visit other schools and then find out what suits each family best. Because it comes from a position of privilege. I would be saying, I have issues with a lot of different types of schools, so it's very hard to not upset people who want to send their child to the local school. But there's a difference between each school, what the local school offers. And I'd say it's very much about an emotional journey. So I write a lot about nomadology, but beyond the virtual concepts of nomadology, much more about the emotional aspects. When you visit schools, you can tell if that fits for you as a family. And for student teachers, they can see differences. Sorry, yeah.
Well, it's interesting because you talked about nomadology, not as a virtual or an abstract concept, but as a literal moving and looking and experiencing in a very embodied way. This seems to be what you do yourself and what you're encouraging others to do, which might be tricky at the moment, I guess.
Yes, very tricky at the moment. And up to now, I've said, websites are helpful, but they don't really give you the full flavour of a place. But at the moment, obviously, it's a very different thing. I mean, I found it very interesting where I wrote the preface of the book in April last year, when most children around the world happened to be at home learning. And now that is beyond what I even would think was thinking was possible when I did my research. Although my research was hoping that we move beyond our current understanding of what is school and schooling, and suddenly it's happening. I'm not necessarily saying what's happening at the moment is great in terms of education, but it is possible to think differently. And I think teachers and young people are being very resilient to cope with those changes and wonder what's going to happen next.
Yeah, there's I guess because of course it is happening, things that were just unthought of, like disrupting the education system that has just been in place for years and years and years, and has a distinctive format, and now people are at home. They're calling it home education, but of course it isn't home education in the normal sense.
No. Well, exactly, and that's what I'd argue, that most people I know that home educate are not really at home very much. But now it's at home learning means because they can't leave the house, so it's a very different. But in a way, what's happened around the world has made it easier for me at times to write this book, because we've been in Australia, we haven't been able to come back to the UK, we haven't been able to do other things. I have been able to work from home, so I haven't needed to leave the house. So when I have had moments to write, I've been able to really hone those moments to write. So in a way, the rhythm and the structure of being at home has changed my time of being a mother and being an academic. So it's been a really interesting year in terms of how I've written the book.
So do you think that's had an influence on how you've written or on your thinking, just the being present at home with a small child?
I'm much better at snapping into being able to, knowing I've got an hour because she's asleep, and I've got that time to write in. So it's a real shift. But also, I've been able to work this last year. I've worked for a series of different universities as a casual academic, and I have learned from teaching. because I love pedagogy, and thinking about how we teach online is something that a lot of people, it's been very scary for a lot of people who are established academics and teachers. And I've been quite excited about how I can engage that in a new way. But it's also meant I could do the job, because I wouldn't have been able to go to an office, to a university, because I didn't want to leave my child. So I can go to the other room for an hour for a lecture and then come out and see her. So it's actually meant I've learned so much from teaching students this last year about how to write and how to pass on ideas, I suppose.
Is that because you can see very directly what they grasp, how you speak something in a way that it is quickly understood? Is it from their questioning?
I think it's because I had a very free PhD program where I was on a scholarship in Freedom to Learn. I lived in a van. I traveled around the world. I traveled around the UK. I turned up once a month, had a supervision, sometimes on Skype. That was the olden days when it was Skype, and submitted a thesis after 3 years, which I learned from the people I met. So a lot of people who are here today are people I met at conferences. I self-taught. I learned about autoethnography. I learned about these different creative, collaborative inquiry methods. I was never taught how to do it because I never did a taught course in it. So I now look at my old writing, and I knew how I struggled a lot in how to write. And it's over these years I've improved, but actually by helping students meet rubrics to pass exams. I mean, I write about how I hate exams and I hate the system, but it's by having to work with people to play the game, I've learned to be more creative. And I think my voice has changed.
So you've done two things. So you've both explored your own way through the kind of this field, if you like, of opportunity that's come, through this network and the Qualitative Inquiry Network and the ideas that are present. So it sounds like you've journeyed your own way through that, and then come into dialogue with students as well. And I'm thinking about what you said about trying to find the ideal school, and thinking, has this been the ideal education for you? To have that freedom to wander.
Sure yes, COVID has helped me in many ways, because it has enabled me to work online and be a mother. I mean, I'm 16,000 kilometers away from my family, and we can't leave Australia, but that's different because you can look at different ways of, it's given me opportunities to be a different academic.
So you have a freedom to be present in this digital space. As we all do.
On the move. I mean, I think that's something I began in my PhD, this nomadology. I wrote that PhD on the road, different people's desks. Hello, Davina. And people's houses, my parents' house, the back of the van, traveling on aeroplanes. It's constantly a nomadology. And this book has been written in different places because we were constantly between different houses after the beginning of when we tried to get back to the UK and got stuck in Australia. So
you got stuck at the airport pretty much, didn't you?
Yeah.
The beginnings of the lockdown.
Almost a year ago.
Yes.
So, but I think that's something I'd like to work with further, is this mobile method, and how actually that has, in terms of my thinking.
So it comes into your writing then, because it's a literal mobility or immobility, and now you have the immobility of your body. You're there in Australia and that's it. But you can move mentally and digitally. And I guess this is coming into your writing, that there's a freedom and also a settledness.
I think so. And in terms of how I like to write with poetry, and I like to write short ethnodramas, and also I've been reading lots more and been learning ways to how to pull that into the text and hopefully engage the reader, but also I've been braver. So this book is more critical, I think, of Steiner Waldorf education, which was the first alternative I found. And I have a really big section there on racism and anthroposophy, the thinking behind Steiner Waldorf education, which I didn't have in my PhD, which I think needs to be said. And I think that's also came to light within Black Lives Matter movement within the UK and well, around the world in 2020, and just being aware of how things are not spoken about. So as I delved into the alternate educations, there's also the shadow sides within what's spoken and what's given voice.
And I guess that brings us round to the idea of creating something new that is fit for purpose now and for the world that we want our children to grow into. Exactly,
and I think I can see some links with what Janice is going to be talking about with storytelling. I really moved into using this idea. There's two academics at the University of Queensland, Louise Phillips and Tracy Bunder, and they wrote a wonderful book on storying. And storying is actually what I brought into the end of my book. And I realized it's not just story, it's storying, and there's so much complexity added into that. And it's just, as things move, and my thinking's moved. So it's been a really exciting experience. It was exhausting, but it wasn't like doing a PhD. There was so much fun involved. I mean, it was hard doing it with a small person, but and what was lovely is we just have a new van. So I wrote the conclusion in our brand new van. So so it's our first van that we've had in Australia.
Okay. Do you know when it's coming out, Alice? Do you know when we can?
No, it's in review at the moment. So hopefully this year.
Hopefully. Well, that would be a nice end to the year. and a reintroduction to freedom, perhaps.
Exactly.
Feels like a good moment to bring Janice in, as you mentioned her. Janice, do you want to unmute yourself?
There we go.
Hi.
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 Can you hear me okay?
Can hear you fine, yeah.
Yeah, good, great.
So Janice, you're now at Edinburgh, you're an established writer and storyteller with a lot of publications under your belt in fiction and particularly children's fiction. But you say your PhD is about mythology and life writing, as you call it. Tell us what you're doing.
Yeah, I am trying to create a methodology, or perhaps you could call it a mythodology. So yeah, kind of bringing together my backgrounds of oral traditional storytelling. So I have been and am an oral traditional storyteller. I've been doing that for about 25 years and have had great privilege to work with some fantastic storytellers, with Scottish travellers. So yeah, and I do some work for the Scottish Storytelling Centre. So there's kind of that running along. And then I have a master's in creative writing and personal development. So looking at writing as a form of self-development, personal development. And yeah, and then I have this whole interest and gathering experience in writing. So writing fiction, but yeah, so there's a lot of kind of crossovers. So my intention here is to create what I'm calling a myth-lit memoir. So, and I'm taking my journey from, well, Duncan Williamson, who was a well-known storyteller, Scottish storyteller, traveller, who died about 10 years ago. And he said stories were teachers. That was his, if you like, epistemology. And Clarissa Pinkola Estes says the same thing, that she says, without strong female elders to pass on the wisdom, what we have as a second best, if you like, is stories. And so what I am doing here is journeying with stories. And because I'm Scottish and because I live here in Scotland, I'm particularly interested in Scottish female identity, or perhaps I'm interested in my identity as a Scottish female. And so I'm journeying with two myths. So one is the legend of the Selkie, and I think we might hear a little bit about that in a moment. But very briefly said, the Selkie is it's a Gaelic word for seal, actually. But in mythology, in a lot of stories, it refers to these magical seals that can whoosh, take off their seal skins, and underneath they are men, women, girls, boys. They run around. So it's a shape-shifting figure. And very often in the old Selkie stories, the Selkie, who, you know, can be a man, but is more often a woman, has her sealskin stolen from her. So while she is in that kind of Persephone state of being innocent and not very awake, perhaps, and dancing and singing and running around, often in the old stories, it's a lonely fisherman who comes along the beach and snatches that skin and uses it as a bargaining tool to marry this woman. So that's one story that I'm journeying with. And through the Selkie, I'm looking at what I'm calling kind of Celtic shamanic soul retrieval, because the Selkie legend to me has a lot to do with loss or being stolen from, and the journey to take back, or the journey to find. And in a sense, the seal skin, you could say, represents the soul, or represents that kind of creative, essential part of us that as we get older, we might think, where did it go? So that's one of my stories that I'm journeying with. And to me, the Selkie relates more to youth and the middle years. And then my other story is the Kaliach. That's another Gaelic word. And the Kaliach is the oldest known goddess, divine earth mother, creation goddess, known in Scotland and in Ireland as she who made the land. And, you know, through the years, this great earth mother has, through the patriarchy, Christianity, whatever, she has been kind of demoted from this great, you know, goddess who can shape Ben Nevis and create lochs and rivers. She's been denoted to an old hag and a kind of old witch. But actually, she is a potent force. And she also, for me, it's to do with aging, it's to do with sovereignty, it's to do with empowerment. It's also very much to do with the landscape. So, sorry, that is a long answer to your short question.
It's a great answer, because I think it really lets me understand, having really not known much about your work at all. I can sort of see where you're going. I do have a clip about you reading some, which I could try and have a look at, if we need it. I mean, I'm curious about what's happened where these stories become children's stories, because you're actually not interested as in the most children's stories, but as quite, you know, very adult stories with quite adult themes around empowerment, it sounds like, and power. In fact, the power of creation.
Yeah,
you're talking about.
Sure, absolutely. Yes. Yeah, so I have written several novels for children, and a lot of my inspiration for these novels came actually from the legend of the Selkie. Yeah, so I've written probably about 6 novels, all to do with, in different ways, the Selkie story. And yeah, I mean, in this little book called The Selkie Girl, I was just simply asked, could I adapt the Selkie story and make it appropriate for children? Because, you know, as you probably know, a lot of stories within the oral tradition are not children's stories. You know, a lot of them are really to do with coming of age. I mean, if you look through Grimm's fairy tales, there's about 6 at the beginning that are called children's stories.
Right.
And the other 300 are called household tales. And often the protagonist is at that age where they are going from the known world into the unknown world. So I think that's more at the age 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, you know.
Yeah, I was going to try and play the clip, but as I listened to you speaking, I think that takes us down the route of how you adapt for children. But I think what you've just said is perhaps a more interesting use of our time today, to think about that stepping from the known world into the unknown world, which is a very contemporary preoccupation in an age where we are all kind of aware that the way we live doesn't work and isn't sustainable, and that we need a new story, that we need to, or perhaps to take from our old stories and tell them differently.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So the idea of a methodology,
yes.
does that speak to this idea of?
Well, so the other component then of journeying with a story is that that we, or I, write. So I'm kind of thinking, oh, what does it mean to journey with a story? I can think about stories, but to actually make it active and bring it up to date. So what I have been doing is I've been, in a kind of autoethnographic way, writing little stories from my life in intuitive response to elements of scenes or imagery within either the Selkie story or the Kaliach story. So, you know, I write my story and I put it there beside these great ancient stories.
So this, for me, links very much to Alice's point about the importance of performing the act. So for you, the physical writing kind of maps to Alice's physical going, engaging, journeying. That you must, you know, there's something about personally doing it that makes it, brings it alive.
Yeah, and you know, I felt for myself that although the writing is, I mean, I love writing, but I felt I also needed to go out. So every day for the past 8 months, I've been swimming in the sea. I know that's a little bit perhaps beyond the reach of research, but actually it's been fantastic. And then a huge part of my kind of research question is to do with, can I be at home in the body, and can I therefore be at home on the land? So I've traveled, you know, to a lot of places. There are a lot of places, particularly in Lochaber, the Highlands, Argyll, that have site-specific names connected to the Kaliach. Lots and lots. You know, the Corrie Vrecken, the whirlpool, that's said to be her wash tub where she washes her plaid, and then when she shakes it out and puts it over the top of Ben Nevis to dry, that is when the snow comes. So it's a kind of reimagining of like, well, yeah, of place. And like Alice, coincidentally, me probably longer than Alice, but I have worked for 25 years in Rudolf Steiner communities, and I did a Rudolf Steiner speech and drama training. So I feel hugely privileged, you know, to have had that kind of unusual, but very artistic, creative, holistic, and imaginative background. And yeah, and now the struggle is the academic, I suppose. You know, can I continue to be creative and artistic and imaginative, and can I bring that into the form of a PhD? I don't know.
Well, here you are doing it, so we'll see. But so that and the relationship then to the Kaliach, who is bigger, I can totally understand how swimming in the sea links you with the Selkie and the Selkie stories, and just in a very embodied sense. But I'm thinking about you up a mountain looking at the snow, and that old understanding of you know, of how we make sense of the landscape and the presence of gods, goddesses, and the sense of smallness of humanity that you know, that comes from that positioning.
Yes, my experience so far is that the Kaliach is a fierce tester. You know, I tried to climb Ben na Kaliach on the Isle of Skye, this huge bloody mountain. I didn't get to the top. I tried to find the old statues of the Kaliach and the Bodach at the foot of Glen Lyon on this kind of 12-mile walk where you have to ford this river. I didn't get to the end because it was getting dark. But in a way that doesn't matter. You know, I feel like I've kind of engaged in this relationship with, you know, with this kind of mystery. And there I am, you know, little me heading off down a glen or up a mountain, trying to kind of find the Kaliach. And obviously, she's kind of something in me, I'm thinking.
Well, I'm thinking
that's where the writing helps.
Yeah, so I was thinking, is it you, is it the PhD, and do you have to master the Kaliach? I mean, is that not, the whole point is that you don't, isn't it, that you can't, that she's bigger.
Yeah.
That maybe you just have, there's something about allowing that.
Absolutely. And so far it's been very interesting. You know, she's depicted as having one eye in her forehead.
Okay.
And it's kind of, you know, this all-seeing oneness. Yeah. So I feel I kind of have a sisterhood with the Selkie and with the Kaliach. Yeah, I don't know. It's definitely a work in progress that will probably take years and years.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to think of that kind of figure as all powerful in the contemporary moment where we think about the earth as something that needs our care, and that you know, we have to mother. If you know, we have to stop abusing, and here you are with a figure that, you know, is very, very powerful. And you're so it's, I don't have any answers. But I wonder where your journey will take you in this dynamic between yourself and that figure, and your writing as well.
yes, yeah. I've written a lot. Yeah.
Good. I'm going, I think, to see if anyone else would like to ask you anything, and or Alice, or whether you'd like to ask each other anything about your work, just to open it up a little bit.
I have a question for Janice.
Hi, Lydia.
Hi.
Hi.
Janice, I get this sense that you've got all this passion and creativity, and you're trying to form a relationship with the academic interaction with it. And I guess I'm asking this question because I have similar, I'm a songwriter and love poetry, but getting ready to hopefully embark on a PhD myself. And I'm finding, I'm curious about how that interaction even begins to happen, or what kind of explorations you've been doing to kind of ignite that movement.
Yeah, well, it was wonderful to discover autoethnography. You know, for me, that that brought so much together. You know, it was yeah, it's very creative, very kind of vulnerable, yeah, and academic. So that was great to discover that. And then also writing as a method of inquiry.
Yeah. Thank you.
I have a question for Alice. I was really moved by some of the things that you were talking about, Alice. I'm just embarking on a doctorate myself, and I suppose playing with the possibility of writing into a multiple voices, multiple kind of experiences of myself. So I was wondering if you could speak a bit more around your experience of writing into, you called it the Alice we. I really liked that term that you used, and then how it moved into the earth we. And yeah, I'd be really curious to hear more from you around those concepts.
Well, I was initially really inspired by a book by Tammy Spry on autoethnography and the other. And it was because I was beginning to realize that I was looking at post-qualitative research and autoethnography, and there's a sort of a troubling between the two of them because of the push of the I in autoethnography. And then when I read Tammy's book on autoethnographic we, I thought, oh, that's interesting. How can I bring that in? And I also realized that when I go and I work as a school teacher or a supply, any job, I wear different hats. And so I began to realize that I could write in these different voices. And it was actually this, once I realized that I had all these ideas to write my PhD as a choose your own adventure storybook. And how was I going to turn this rhizome, something so big and creative, into the format of a PhD? And by giving different voices and then writing in different styles, I was able to develop, I think they change. And that's the other thing. I write in lots of voices. And then when I write this book, I was like Alice, the PhD student, but now I'm Dr. Alice. I was Alice, the future parent. I'm now Alice, the parent. So lots of them are quite obvious changes, but there's lots of more subtle shifts. And when I looked back, I realized that when I started this research, I've been so very much driven by concerns about the environment and ecological viewpoints. And then when I'd visited lots of schools, although I am a forest school leader, I didn't really include very much because I was so drawn by looking at democratic or more Steiner and critiquing Steiner further. So I added in the ecological voice, ecological Alice at the end. But then I realized that a lot of my research was just picky. Definitions of what does alternative mean? Oh no, what is innovative? What are these different types of schooling? And actually it was a much bigger picture. So that's why I stepped back into Earth way on looking at a much more global concept on almost like a consciousness shift. There's actually quite a lot of writing on multiple identities, and Kim Everington has written a lot, and Jane Speedy, and there's a lot that's coming out that is really helpful in terms of thinking about these different voices, and that was very helpful. And I was also meant that I could have some quite playful. I have the queering of Bad Alice. I have for when I'm putting more playful voices through, when I'm really sort of beginning to critique myself. But in response to the book, I actually added in Alice the Guide, because I realized that it's so easy to not be helpful to your reader. And so I added this extra voice in to try and shepherd people through. But also when I have some interviews, which I've included, some of the opinions and views are so out there that I didn't agree with, that by adding in Alice the Guide, I could be adding in this voice saying, this is what I'm thinking in my head at the moment. What's really going on here?
Lovely.
Yeah, I really like that idea of Alice the Guide. It kind of makes me think of almost Alice the researcher as well, but a researcher that's learning how to articulate with the audience that you're kind of speaking to as well.
Yeah, and it creates a space for being a bit more humble. I think sometimes but you can put these voices in, you can put a more full version of yourself and a more critical version of yourself as well.
Thank you.
Good luck.
Thanks.
It's wonderful what you can do when you realize how free you are to play with your voice, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
Tatiana, you have some questions? I see your hand up.
Yeah, I have a question for both, actually. You both touch upon the nomadic, the traveling and tinkering. And I was wondering whether you had any nomadic encounter with fellow scholars, and if so, which frames, and how was it? Because you, Alice, you have the traveling, the nomadic in the school, and Janice is describing the more storytelling traveling, and I was wondering whether you ever tried such experiences in scholarly contexts, perhaps with fellow scholars.
You mean traveling
because of
with them, or?
Yeah.
Yeah, in any form. So because I was thinking about the nomadic science, and we have very concrete examples of nomadic research, and I was wondering why we don't do that anymore. You know, hopping in a van together and engaging in nomadic conversations and experiences and embodied chaos. Yeah.
I mean, I have a mentor called Linda Williamson, and she embodied the nomadic scholarly path by being a PhD student a long time ago in the States on some Scottish storytelling, something like that. And then she came over to Scotland, interviewed Duncan Williamson, who was living in a tent on the shores of Loch Fyne, and married him and became Linda Williamson, and got her completed her PhD while living in a tent. And he knew, before he died, Duncan Williamson apparently knew 5,000 stories, songs, and ballads. These people who kind of carry this great heritage of memory. And so what she did with a little typewriter in that tent was write a lot of them down and publish them as books. So she's done that, and I just go and visit her, and she kind of gives me books and things. But that's not quite your question.
I think I'm here because of nomadology, though, compared to not just my research, because I went to ICQI, I met Davina, and through meeting Davina, I got involved with AnyNet, and through AnyNet, I found more connections at ICQI, and now with CCRI. It's this continual nomadology, but also Michael, I don't think Michael's here because he's in Texas, but I met Michael at a conference in down in Plymouth in 2017. He came to my presentation on the ideal school, said, I'm also visiting lots of schools and I'm going to be in New York in a few weeks with some students. I said, oh, I'm going to be in America. And I met him and we spent a week visiting schools together as a group with another academic and with these pre-service teachers. And we've carried on that journey, visiting schools, connecting, meeting, talking about things and turning things into ethnodramas and writing chapters. And I've been visiting his students online and sharing more stories. So I feel that there's, maybe the internet's also helping that, this nomadology of connecting with other people and visiting and yeah. And Melissa and I were talking about earlier, we're in these different places. She says, welcome to Edinburgh, but she's in Bristol. I'm in Australia. We're all in these different places, but we're all in the same moment, even if we're in different times. But there's more scope, Tatiana, definitely, of traveling together, maybe moving conferences.
Did you want to say something, Davina? I saw you wave.
Yeah.
You know, you're mute.
Hi, am I unmuted? Yeah.
Yeah.
I just wanted to say something because I think it's kind of excites me what Janice and Alice are doing in that, and certainly with my PhD, which was also arts-based, practice-based, arts-based, is that idea of trying to find a way between the control and form that you need for the structure of a PhD and kind of crafting this document that gives a validity to all of those choices that you made about turning left and not right and right and not left, and the kind of randomness actually that journey entails, but finding a form where that is explained to the reader, you know, that and those decisions are given a structure, but that between that control and form and then the playful spontaneity of creativity, I find I just love that. I find that so exciting, you know. And Jane Speedy, who has been cited here a few times, talks about this thing called the continuous present of a gerund. So I always think that it kind of, because it's in the doing, it's in the ing words, it's in the gerunds that those two things come together, I think, and that actually can be really inspiring for a reader. So that was it was something that I felt connected Alice and Janice together. So I just wanted to kind of say it, but I don't know if you have a response for that. But it was kind of more an observation than a question, as ever.
I have a baby crying. I will be back. See you in a bit.
I think it is a really interesting observation about, you know, that marriage between play and form. I mean, poets do it all the time, at least poets that work to forms. Yeah, so that, I think that will be the challenge.
Yeah, and I suppose also those notions around play. I got really interested in Richard Schechner's idea around dark play, because, you know, we have this idea that play is linked to childhood and always a kind of joyful experience. And actually there's a flip side to play, and there's a darkness in play, and there's a power in play that often gets passed over almost. So yeah, I really, and certainly around ritual Schechner's ideas that link in with Victor Turner. And those ideas of kind of creating spaces where people go through a transformational experience. Yeah.
I just wanted to come back to Tatjana's question before we move on and say that I think the collaborative writing space, which is where I've certainly been in those spaces with you, Alice, and Davina, and that combination of journeying together into the unknown and it being quite dangerous sometimes and very, very, very evocative, very powerful to experience, certainly strikes me as a place that, you know, in collaborative work is where we get that play together. Yeah. And Mark, you've written something, and Joanna, I can see you had your hand up. Joanna, do you want to come in? Yeah.
Yeah, if there's still time for a question.
Yeah, we've got plenty of time.
Okay, yeah, well, it's both for Janice and Alice, she's not here now, but I could repeat it. So I'm also a writer, and I'm also working on my first manuscript for children, and my research at University of Edinburgh also reflects upon narratives for children. And I empathize with what Janice said about this sometimes conflict of like being a creative and also an academic, and a specific issue that I found in discussion with one of my supervisors, Alette Willis, recently was this idea of like instrumentalizing stories. That when we look at what stories mean and how they influence our culture, is almost as if we are deconstructing the magic, as almost if you go to a theme park as a child, but when you understand that there's no real and it's machine moving, it kind of loses a little bit of, it might lose a little bit of its magic. And then we find the magic and the appeal in that curiosity of digging deeper. But my question is like how Janice and Alice, like in particular, how do you deal with this sometimes conflict? Like I feel that conflict lately, and I'm still learning how to resolve it and to be truth to my work, both as a creative and creating stories for what they are, to be engaging regardless of what they say as a moral story in the end. But as a researcher, it's more about what they say than about if they are engaging or not.
Yeah, I suppose it's perhaps some to do with the ability to wear different hats. You know, I also write little picture books for children, and to do that, I put on a very different hat, which is lovely. You know, I love it, but I don't do it all the time. Like, say, Julia Donaldson does that hat all the time. So yeah, I mean, for me, I'm in the middle of it. You know, I'm in no way an expert. I've got many more questions. Yeah, I've got a lot of experience about writing fiction and writing for children, so that I can talk about, but yeah, I can't talk very much with great intelligence about being an academic, because for me, that is the new hat. And it's like, does that fit? And it's maybe a bit like Alice's question, because she's talking about where's the perfect school, and is education, what is it anyway? And so I suppose, you know, somewhere in my mind, there's a bit of a question. What is it all about? You know, what is this education? What is a PhD? And has it changed much? You know, as we change, does that format and that structure and what is expected, has that kind of changed with? So, yeah, I don't know. I don't know, maybe Jonathan could say something to that, being both creative and academic. How do you marry the two? without, you know, one really suffering?
It reminds me of it's been so interesting hearing you talk, and Alice, and it reminds me, it's a different question, but it reminds me, I once wrote something when I was doing my thesis which I did jointly with Ken Gale, and I wrote something, and Jane Speedy was our supervisor at Bristol, and I wrote something that said something, but this is a thesis, so it can't be, this is a thesis, not therapy. And Jane Speedy wrote in the margin, who says that a thesis can't be therapeutic? Who says that? And I think that's the similar response. Who says that the academic work can't also be creative? It seems a really strange binary to draw, that it's entirely arbitrary. Somebody has said that at some point, and it just doesn't make sense to me, because in a sense it's inevitable that any writing to some extent is creative. It's craft, it's made, so it's creating something. It might not be described as creative, but it inevitably is. So I just think the binary doesn't work. I can't compute it.
Go on, Tatiana.
I have a good story. Thank you, Jonathan. I wrote it down because this will be my next answer to my students. I teach creative academic writing to undergraduate students. And the last time I taught it, because I do it with a lot of creative techniques and so forth. And in the break, this student came close and asked me, "Yes, this is very good, but are you going to teach us to write academically?" Yes, this is, no, I mean, you know, like boring. And I was put off the track. So my next answer would be, no, who said that academic writing can't be creative and fun? So, but that was, you know, and I think because we are absolutely socialized in this understanding of binary and dualistic, so this can't be the other. If it's serious, it can't be fun and creative and poetic. So, but yeah, my students really got it.
Mark, you've got your hand up.
Yes, it's really just following on the flow, really. And I want to come back to the word being a tinker. My mum used to tell me off for being a tinker. She used to call me, "Oh, you little tinker," which was an affectionate, I think, kind of admonishment of being slightly naughty or something. But I think, I don't know why I thought of that. Well, anyway, but the thing about tinkering, I think, is that we are now in the place of tinkering with our stories and those that we're tinkering with what being an academic means. We're tinkering with what creative means in that context. And there's a danger that it becomes it's like it's not proper. The tinkering is then seen as less than. It's just tinkering with the system. It's just tinkering. But actually, through tinkering, I think we find new alignments. We find new ways of trying on the new hats, trying on the new shoes. So I guess what I'm taking from both Alice and Janice is, and the conversation generally, is an encouragement to tinker and to see what comes out of that tinkering. And I think that, I do think, having been an academic for a while, we give academia too much power if we feel it's not possible to be creative or it's not possible to be a certain way. and unfortunately, lots of people are now not conforming to any straitjacketed sense of tinkering. But interesting, I noticed that I'm wearing a jacket because I've got a viva for a doctorate in a second. So interesting, I noticed that I thought I ought to dress more smartly for that. So perhaps I'm not quite ready to tinker completely.
It's interesting that you mentioned tinkering, and because Janice mentioned the stories coming from traveling communities. And I was thinking this morning about growing up on the edge of a city, as I did in Dublin, and the presence of tinkers, as they were then called, now travellers, and the way that they gave an edge to, they defined people like me as settled folk, which wouldn't have been they troubled our mode of existence, and they still do, and they're now, their voices are more heard in academic circles, particularly. But I think this idea of questioning
boobies,
what we're doing. Boobies.
Sorry.
Makes us aware. Yeah, it's letting the outside world in and saying, yeah, why shouldn't there be boobies in academia? It's part of our lives, isn't it?
I had to critique the concept of the nomad working in Australia, because one of the terrible things about how the Indigenous people have been positioned in Australia has been as labeling people as nomadic in a derogatory sense and incorrect. A lot of the research is saying very different things about the Indigenous people in Australia. And so I had to really step into what did it mean to use the term of being a nomad. And then actually within Australia, there's a lot of white Australian history of school teachers traveling around Australia to work as teachers nomadically, moving every few years. So there is some other nomadic history in terms of moving around. But it's interesting that when you move your beliefs to an understanding of yourself to a different country and a different culture, how you have to, again, be positioned where you're at. And it changes. Yeah, which is something I've learned from the terms and the labels like you've been talking about in your lives, and how it changes at different times.
There's also questions of whether you feel the right to inhabit certain labels, such as a nomad or a traveller, if you're coming from a position of white relative privilege.
Exactly, yes.
And how you inhabit it.
I can't find that putting my hand up button. Can I ask a question, Melissa?
Just jump in, go on.
I wanted to just come back to you, Janice, in your question about what sense do you feel you're making of this marrying of or bringing together of the creative and the PhD? What's your experience of that? Are you feeling like you've got space? Is it proving awkward and uncomfortable, that being a newish academic in the kind of writing in this milieu? Kind of what sense are you making of it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was easier in the first year because it was not the pandemic. And so I was able to engage with people, hear lectures, have classes, have discussions, and kind of moved along in a river, which was new to me and which was wonderful. And And anyway, I think the second year of a PhD, you're not in that river so much, but certainly with the pandemic, I'm not in it at all, apart from, you know, such little events like this, which is great. Yeah, so kind of thrown on my own quite a lot, learning as I go, wondering, am I getting it right? Am I doing this right? Probably usual PhD kind of questions. You know, producing a lot of creative writing and then wondering, oh, is this now, all this creative writing has got to be now turned into data and analyzed and whatever. So yeah, a bit confused, really.
Yeah, there's the kind of very concrete issue comes up for me, but I think also for students in bringing those, what feels like the bringing together of two voices, two registers together. I mean, it's obviously much more than just the two, but of kind of how can we write creatively and include citations and theory? How that feels like that's kind of can feel like quite an awkward blend, and sometimes the strategy is to keep it separate. You know, you have the academic bit, which is the literature review or something, and then you do the creative bit, which never feels to me like it quite works. But that's the kind of concrete way in which it feels like that comes into view.
But I think the word methodology then is very interesting, but that's because I'm a huge believer in sort of having a structure that gives you freedom then. And I think once you understand the frame or have created one, or the skeleton, or something that you can work off, that then you can move freely. But that comes from my therapeutic experience, perhaps, or trying to create frames within which it's possible to be spontaneous. So I'm really interested in what you're going to come up with as a methodology. Yeah.
I also think it's about finding those characters, like those people who can be on your side. So those theorists or other academics who speak to you, you know, and that you get, and that get you, because they are like your, you know, they're your roll call of the people you can put up as, like, you know, I'm not, you know, they're your lineage in a way. They help show that, you know, that kind of continuous development. Well, certainly that was my experience.
Yeah.
Just wanted to say, there's a wonderful book called Disrupting Data. Can't remember who it's by, but it's a lovely book about what we imagine data to be. I'll find the reference for you, Janice, and
oh, thank you.
Yeah, it's a lovely book.
What does your comment mean, Mark? Sitting on the settee with Brian and Giles.
I remember being in a session with you, Melissa, and you talked about being on the, I'm sure it was about being on a settee somewhere with Brian Eno.
Ambient Brian and
Gilles.
Felix and Gilles, yeah.
That's right. No, and it just reminds me about being in conversation with, that rather than there's a way of kind of being alongside them, and imagine, you know, I kind of, you know, having imaginary conversations with people that somehow, you know, what would Patti Smith say at this moment, you know, kind of thing, which is I've done occasionally in my life, is imagine the people that I think a lot of, what advice would they give me? It was just a playful way of You know, how do we bring the academic voice, to use that phrase, in with our own more creative stuff?
And Mark, can I just ask, what advice do you think that they would give you? What would she say right now?
Patti Smith? Oh, goodness me. I couldn't believe, oh gosh. She's just got the most brilliant book my favorite book of hers is called Wall Gathering. And it's just this kind of such a gentle shift between different moments of reflection and acute observation. And she's got great photos as well, which is always a good thing as far as I'm concerned. David Byrne would be the other one that I would have a lot of conversations with, but that's another matter. Hey, listen, I'm going to go. I've got the mic open because I've got a session to go to now, but can I just say thank you, Janice and Alice. It was brilliant, and it felt a very gentle and informative and inspiring and meandering, with the best possible type of meandering session. And thanks, Melissa, for with the most.
See you soon, Mark. Okay.
Thank you.
And Mel, I see you've got your hand up.
Hi, Mel Green from the University of Queensland. I'm also in Brisbane on a lovely balmy evening. I'm very, very fortunate in working with Liz McKinlay, who I know, Jonathan, is a good friend of yours. And she leads us in a draw group, departing radically from academic writing. And we know we have a daily writing group, but we also have a group on the last Friday of the month at 4 p.m. our time, which I think is 6 a.m. your time. And we have students, PhD candidates from Cambridge join us. And I'm sure, Janice, you'd be very welcome to join us too. And Liz leads us in writing creatively, you know, writing academic work in a very creative way. And, you know, I've been working with Liz for 18 months now, and it has been an absolute joy to write a thesis this way. So I'd like to extend the invite to you, Janice. If you go to Facebook and you look for DRAW, D-R-A-W, Departing Radically in Academic Writing, hopefully you'll find us, and I'll let Liz know. And yeah, I hope that we can help you too.
Thank you. Yeah, okay. That'd be a nice thing to do at 6 in the morning.
Mel, maybe if you could post us a link, and this seems like a good moment to tell you about another event that is going to be happening here at Edinburgh, as I like to say, on this coming Thursday morning. Nini Fang and Anne Peary are doing a webinar called Gone Too Far: Lived Realities, Ethical Relations and Confrontations in the Neoliberal University. This is based on their paper called Venturing from Home, Writing and Teaching as Creative Relational Inquiry for Alternative Educational Futures, which I think gives you a sense of where I'm going with the link. It certainly talks about throwing off familiar academic conventions in order to promote relational ethics in a sector that has been colonized by new managerialism and the associated mechanisms of performance management, surveillance and exclusion. So by engaging in dialogue, Anne and Nini cast light on the performative revelation of Nini's ethical struggles in developing and delivering anti-racist curriculum against the backdrop of the oppressive climate of contemporary higher education. So I think that might be of interest to those of us thinking about doing educational research differently. And also I've posted the information for you in a Word document called Gone Too Far, because there's an Eventbrite link. If I manage to post this audio online in time for people to get it, it probably won't be then you'll have to go into Google Nini Fang and Anne Peary. So we're coming towards the end of our time. I just wonder if anyone has any closing remarks. Speak now.
Thank you, Melissa. And thank you, Alice. I think she's still there.
I'm here.
Yeah.
You're bobbing up and down just out of view, but you're there. Yeah. It's good to know. Yeah, it's good to know we're all here in our little boxes. Thank you, Alice. Thank you, Janice, so much for coming and sharing with us what you're doing. It's been really great to get an insight and to feel connected, and to have this unknown journey with you through this last hour and a half.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, I agree. So inspiring. Just really helpful to hear that. Just sense of embracing that ambiguous position, I think, and knowing that that's okay, and that's it's been really helpful. So thank you.
Really good. Okay, so
Melissa.
Great, yeah, thank you, Tatiana. Thank you for coming back as well. And I hope to see you all in a month's time, when we'll have some new guests. Okay, take lots of care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Thanks so much.